Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Newsroom. I'm your host, Khalid. But today is the 14th of March 2023, and these are the stories that we will be discussing in detail in the course of the show. We'll begin with the financial crisis that has struck the Silicon Valley since the bank failure of the 2008 financial crisis. This is a new financial crisis that has hit the United States, and the repercussions are going beyond the US, even in the European Union. Now, the Silicon Valley Bank collapsed. What happened? We will be discussing in detail as far as to what the repercussions of that has been on the financial system in the United States of America. There has been reassurances by Joseph Biden as well. At the same time, the global markets who have been gripped by the collapse include Credit Suisse, that has fallen by 4%, and 382 billion euros of bank stocks have been wiped off the banks. This and more will be discussed in the first segment. Our second story of the day, ladies and gentlemen, concerns the world responsibilities towards illegal migration. We have discussed that in previous shows as well, but the fact remains that illegal immigration continues throughout the world. 30 people are missing, 17 have been rescued in the central Mediterranean Sea. On Sunday, after the boat in which people were traveling from Libya capsized in bad weather. This has been stated by Libya's Coast Guard. Very recently, just a few days back, February 26th shipwreck is something that we had also discussed and highlighted in detail, but the process continues to go on. What is the responsibility of the different governments across the world in order to handle this illegal migration properly? This is going to be our second segment. Let's come to our third story, and that concerns Punjab Culture Day that is being celebrated across the province today. Various messages of congratulations have poured in on social media platforms by our leadership, and of course Punjab is a very vibrant province of Pakistan, and we have a lot of traditions, a lot of color, and that color is being represented in this Punjab Culture Day. Today has been, in fact, all day long. We are in the evening. And finally, we'll be talking about the Senate that is to celebrate its 50th anniversary with a 3-day event which is going to begin tomorrow at the Parliament House in Islamabad. Various events are also scheduled to be held in this very regard. So a lot of celebrations. Nevertheless, we end on a very positive note. Let's begin with our first segment, and that concerns the financial crisis that has hit since the collapse of the SVP in the United States of America. What kind of repercussions has that had on the US and on other stock markets across the globe? More in the following report.
The collapse of Silicon Valley Bank, the biggest bank failure in the United States since 2008, has sent shockwaves through financial and tech circles. United States regulators seized the assets of Santa Clara, California-based bank after depositors began withdrawing funds massively amid fears over the lender's financial health. Financial regulators around the world have raced to contain the fallout of SVB's collapse and shore up confidence in the global financial system. Silicon Valley Bank's business focused heavily on U.S. technology startups. During the COVID-19 pandemic, the lender saw a surge in deposits as tech companies profited from providing entertainment and delivery services to people confined to their homes. SVB's troubles began when the United States Federal Reserve started raising interest rates last year in response to soaring inflation, causing the value of those bonds to fall. As economic conditions for the tech sector became more straitened following the pandemic boom, many of SVB's customers began to draw on their fund. 2 days after the collapse of SVB, U.S. regulators seized the assets of Signature Bank, a New York-based lender known for its business with the cryptocurrency sector, marking the third largest bank failure in U.S. history. Bank shares, including those of the U.S. Big Four, JP Morgan Chase, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, and Citibank, have dipped sharply amid fears of contagion across the financial sector.
Dr. Usman W. Chohan, Economist, joins us online. Usman, it's always a pleasure to talk to you when it concerns our economy or the economy of the world, because the discussion always remains extremely fruitful for myself and the audience. Let's begin with what happened since Friday, when the collapse of the SVB happened, and on Sunday, the Signature Bank was also closed down to prevent a crisis in the broader banking system. There has been such a lot of repercussion of that in the US financial system and in the European financial system as well, and it is continuing as we speak. Why and how did the SVB fail?
Basically, what you have right now are the repercussions of incompetence. Supreme incompetence at a core institution in the global financial system, which is the US Federal Reserve. They, if you remember, pumped in a ton of money in 2008 when the financial crisis happened without patching over the real problems of society. Socioeconomic problem. And they pumped even more in 2020 with COVID. And again, it didn't go to the regular people, unlike our stimulus here in Pakistan. It went to the big corporations. So much money was put into the system that it helped to perpetuate a systemic inflationary tide. Then the Fed thought that this is literally their words, transitory. That this is just because we're reactivating the world economy after COVID, that inflation is not a big deal. The thing is, it was. And it was because they had pumped so much liquidity into the system since 2008 and 2020. So then they raised rates at an unprecedented pace. They raised them so fast that the rest of the world couldn't keep up. Now, the first dominoes to fall were actually some emerging markets. You are well familiar with what happened to Sri Lanka, as well as to countries now that are in distress, such as us and Egypt. The thing is, the American system is now also facing the repercussions of that supreme incompetence of the US Federal Reserve. Now, if you want more details specifically on SVB, how the mechanism works, it is that
when it comes to the SVB, I'd like to understand, Usman, I was going through it, and they said that they used to keep a small chunk in cash. They used to ask all the depositors to invest in treasury bonds, and when all of that didn't comply with the way, as you yourself have explained, curb the inflationary rates that had gone far too high, it resulted in the collapse. This said, do you feel that all of the problems of the SVB were just related to high interest rates?
Absolutely. I mean, that is the core of it, and that's why the whole global financial system is having convulsions. At the root, it is this. SVB, in that liquidity-rich environment, decided to get some extra yield, some extra kicker from the deposits, because banks work on the spreads. So they needed something to get a good spread when actually the world wasn't paying much. It was a low interest rate environment. So they did the 10-year bonds and so on. Their exposure was about $120 billion, right? And their deposits were $200 billion. And these are really big numbers. And when the interest rates go up, the value of the bonds that you currently hold fall, because now the government will issue new bonds with higher interest rates for the same durations. A new 10-year bond will come up which pays 6 or 5%, and what you owned is only paying 1%. So high yields means the prices of bonds sink. And when you're talking hundreds of billions or tens of billions of dollars at any one point, that means that when people snap onto it, they will run on the bank. And they will try to pull out their money, knowing that these guys will be in a deep duration mismatch between what they will.
Usman, here I'd like to say something that Joe Biden quoted. He said, no losses will be borne by the taxpayers. Let me repeat, no losses will be borne by the taxpayer. But let me add this little phrase. He said that investors in the banks will not be protected. What does that bode for investors?
Extreme disappointment, but this is what moral hazard is all about. In economics, we talk about moral hazard where you do bad behavior because authorities have authorized you to do bad behavior, to conduct bad behavior. That's what 2008 was about too. Now what is happening is that there's a corporation, the FDIC, which secures you for $250,000. The thing is, SVB had many deposits or accounts with far more than that. All of that is being protected. That is on the depositor side to keep the systemic risk low. But that doesn't mean that the executives, they are decapitated. And the investors who hold shares in this, they are in big trouble because they will not be protected. So that is why, as your report correctly mentioned, the banking stocks everywhere, or the financial sector within the investment universe, equity universe is falling because of a risk that it might spread, even though it won't necessarily spread because depositors have been protected.
How widespread will this fallout be? I was just going through some of the statistics before I came to the studios. They were saying Credit Suisse had fallen by 4%. And this market panic that has been caused by the collapse of the SVB has wiped 382 billion euros of bank stocks in the recent days. And then there are so many other banks that have been affected by it. How long, how widespread is this collapse going to have as a repercussion?
There's two elements to repercussions. One is sentiment, and sentiment has been devastated. People should have seen this coming, that ultimately in a new paradigm of high interest rates, all of the people who have exposure to low interest rate strategies will be in trouble. Sentiment is devastating. But as far as actual contagion, there are some other banks. Now, if I mention their names, I mean, one that's being talked about a lot is First Republic. And there's a few others like that that have similar problems
Signature
in
Bank,
terms of,
why not talk about Signature Bank that has been closed as well on Sunday?
oh, because that's already in the red. There's Signature, there's SVB. That's fine. But what could be next is what we're
Yes.
really worried about. And
Do
so
you feel
First
that
Republic.
many banks are going to be next as far as the US financial system is concerned? Do you feel the US regulators or the US government will be able to handle it the way it handled the 2008 crisis?
Well, I don't believe that they handled it particularly well in 2008. They
I
say
know.
that things were much worse. They say that things would have been much worse, but that's counterfactual argumentation. The thing is, if you don't address the systemic problems, the structural problems in society, and you just put a lot of morphine into the system, ultimately the morphine wears out. Now, here is the problem, because you have asked such a beautiful and important question, who will be spared? I feel that there is a too big to fail mentality, and it's very difficult to identify who is too big because it seems like because SVB was like in the top 20, but it wasn't in the top 5. So who is too big now? Is everybody too big? Well, then what is the relationship between the banking system and the government if the government is going to protect everybody? And then what the incentive is for depositors is like it doesn't matter where you put your money. You just put it where you'll get the highest return. Ultimately, the government come and bail you out, and that has a very negative consequence on capitalism.
All right, when you talk of consequences, I'd like to understand in 2008, in the aftermath of the crisis, the Congress had passed the Dodd-Frank financial regulatory package to prevent any such collapse. A lot of experts are saying that that package was also faulty in its origin. Is that the case?
You have to go a little bit further back in time to the Clinton administration, and basically they began to revoke the rules that had existed since the Great Depression. They had learned very serious lessons about banks in the 1920s, 100 years ago. And in the 90s, they started getting rid of that, so Dodd-Frank was a response to try to bring some of that back. It was very good, it was very tough in terms of keeping capital ratios and all that stuff. But the fact is that banks also respond to a system and a set of rules. And if the Federal Reserve is going to do knee-jerk things, what it has done in terms of increasing interest rates is equivalent to knee-jerk reactions. And we aren't clear on what the Fed will do next because it is committed to a path of interest rate rise. And that means that even as it is seeing the signs of things teetering on the brink, like these private banks, it still has that trajectory to go through. Otherwise, you de-anchor the expectations of the market towards your trajectory, and then people will have no idea where interest rates will go. Right now, they're following a trajectory, even as their casualties on the side. So they're caught between a rock and a hard place, and that's why my argument about incompetence, it affects you and me sitting here. The fact that there are no dollars in this country, or there are very few dollars, is attributable to the Fed raising rates so fast. It's the same problem that's affecting the whole world. So you really have to think about how our global system is structured. And you've correctly mentioned that Europe is being disproportionately affected because of something happening in California.
That is so true. But Usman, do you foresee a broader meltdown in the coming days? In your point of view, you just said that we in Pakistan are also being affected by this financial crisis in the US. But in the coming days and weeks, if this crisis is not controlled properly by the government or by the financial agencies in the US, what is going to happen to the global system?
I mean, God forbid. I think that they are taking strong measures, and I do sympathize with the regulators who are acting quickly, acting to protect all depositors at all costs. I think it is very important to do that. But it also shows that they are more of a trauma and emergency ward. They are not there on the R&D or the serious doctor stuff to remedy how the financial system works. And your question, to add to that, is what could be the financial devastation? Well, you would have basically a panic in the equity markets, in the bond markets. I mean, the secondary bond market would freeze. There'd be no movement in it. So basically, whatever system has been working would be paralyzed. I mean, that's the worst case scenario. And I don't think that will happen because regulators have acted to this emergency in a timely manner. But the thing is, nobody really knows how far it can go. There may be many other banks who are equally exposed with a duration mismatch because the interest rates are rising and they're stuck with these now degraded bonds, devalued bonds already on their balance sheets.
Now, do you feel, Usman, also that the repercussions as far as this financial crisis is concerned might affect other systems as well, including the technological ecosystem across the world and in the United States of America? Do you feel there's going to be an indirect effect on it?
Yes, I think this is a very important question to ask. It's not just about the financial markets. Financing is supposed to be something that facilitates economic life, but it isn't economic life itself. So there's the Wall Street and there's the Main Street. And is Main Street going to be affected? Yes, because you have to see which two out of the three banks that have already collapsed, what they were doing. Signature Bank was very important by facilitating transactions with cryptocurrencies. And you may well know that the cryptocurrency markets have taken a very severe beating since 2022 as part of the monetary contraction, because a lot of money that came through the previous pumping had gone into crypto. This facilitator is now in trouble, really in trouble. Finished. And SVB was a facilitator for startups. So its risk appetite was larger than traditional or bigger banks because it would work with Silicon Valley startups and help venture capitalists to do that. So these were important functions in which they specialized. But there are other banks that fill other niches within the US economy, and they might equally be exposed, and therefore the users, the end users in that sector may be severely affected, as crypto with Signature and the tech startups with Silicon Valley Bank.
Shares in other banks, for example, including First Republic Bank, that's a regional bank, have been down 60% on Monday. Do you feel other banks' shares are also going to be reduced in the coming days or as we speak?
Yes, absolutely. The general sentiment towards equities has been very negative since 2022. It's an asset class where a lot of money had gone after 2020. Do you remember this paradox when in 2020 the whole world economy was essentially paralyzed, but the stock market was booming between March and June 2020? Does it make sense to you that
No.
the financial markets are doing so well when the economy isn't working at all? So because of that binge, now you're getting the opposite thing where COVID is over and things are beginning to work, but the financial system on its own is having these convulsions. And so, yes, I believe I had mentioned First Republic to you. You have reiterated the name. There are other banks that will similarly fall in stock prices. Therefore, what has been a culture of risk taking and not timing, not anticipating inflation, not taking it seriously, and then also being held hostage to the incompetence of the Federal Reserve, that is very difficult for, I mean, what is an executive supposed to do these days? You are held
Let's talk of
hostage.
the executive. Let's talk of the US executive. Now, Monday morning, President Biden reassures Americans that the financial system is stable and that customers' deposits will be there when you need them. Also, Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen says on Sunday that regulators have been working over the weekend to stabilize the SVB. But there are reports of the FDIC that it has begun an auction of the SVB that was set to wrap up by Sunday afternoon. Then also the FDIC has invoked a systemic risk exception which allows the government to pay back uninsured depositors. So many reports. What do you make of it? What is the ultimate conclusion?
It goes back to our previous discussion, which I think is very important for the audience to understand, is that this is a systemic risk exception. How many more exceptions will happen? Is everybody an exception? If they're an exception, then they are the rule. Therefore, the rules have changed. And that's what I think markets are responding to. You see all of these statements that are coming from important people. They are meant to try to calm a very panicked community. But the community of investors talks to each other. They follow the Twitter. They follow shows like yours. And they all are in getting signals from one another. And they can only respond to an authority to some degree. They ultimately are accountable to their immediate stakeholders. That means that they have to protect them. And to be on the safe side in a panicked market, they may still act against the reassuring claims of authorities. Even in the UK, they have, because there's an SVP UK also. The UK regulators
but they have said that the SVB in the UK is a smaller bank. The effect on the financial system in the UK is not going to be as significant because the SVB bank is quite a small one in the UK.
That's correct. And in addition, HSBC has been asked to take care of it so that the UK taxpayer doesn't deal with it. The same claim has been made in the United States. So the question is, the taxpayer, that is more of a populist sentiment because taxpayers still bear a resentment from 2008 where things were saved but nobody was punished. So that whole reassuring and signaling is important, but I'm not convinced that the market is going to respond automatically to such reassuring messages. They all have their vested personal interest to protect first and foremost.
Usman, let's talk about other banks as well. Western Alliance in Arizona has tumbled 45%. KeyCorp and Comerica have tumbled 30%. Zions Bancorp in Utah has fallen by 25%. You talk of this whole sentiment of risk taking that has led to this. Do you feel a normal customer, a normal citizen that wants to put his money will no longer be putting his money in shares? He will be more conscious, and there will be less of risk taking in the future as a result of this financial crisis?
At least, yes, at least for the immediate future, let's say 2 to 3 months, there will be a jitteriness among ordinary people. And I'll share with you some personal experience, because my early career was with global equities and so the share market and all that. And I witnessed 2008 from very up close. I was in North America at the time working in this. So I understand how the panic and the animal spirits can actually detract from sound analysis. There are very decent, financially sound, not exposed banks that will also be victims. And part of that is the asset allocation that investment managers do. When they see one problem in the financial sector, one bank or two banks, they tend to reduce their exposure to the whole financial sector and go towards something more conservative. They may even hold cash. Similarly, they may do, if they're at the asset allocation level, they may go out of equities altogether and go towards bonds, because bonds are becoming nicer, more attractive, new issuances as the interest rates rise. The old guys are in big trouble, but the new issuances. So there's asset allocation and then stock selection, sector selection decisions that impact how investors with large, tens of billions, hundreds of billions of dollars think about this stuff. And so I understand that there are banks that are in decent condition with fine, pristine almost balance sheets.
But Usman, tell me, why are banks such as Citigroup or Wells Fargo, Bank of America much more stable than the other banks? What is the reason behind it? Is it their strategy? Is it their financial mechanisms that have stabilized them more compared to other regional banks? Usman, are you with us? Well, we kind of have lost touch with Usman W. Chohan, who is our economist. He was talking about this financial crisis that has, of course, engulfed the United States of America. There have been repercussions in other countries as well. I talked about Credit Suisse, whose shares have gone reduced by 4%. And there are other banks also across the world and in the United States that have been affected. Not the big banks as far as, for example, Citigroup and Wells Fargo that have fallen more than 7%, Bank of America more than 3%, JP Morgan dipped more than 1%. The big ones are still stable, but the small regional banks are the ones who have borne the brunt of all that has happened. As a result of that, of course, there is a lot of crisis, a lot of negative sentiment amongst the people in the United States of America. And as Usman also pointed out, there's going to be a repercussion, direct or indirect, to other financial sectors across the world, including ours as well. The fact remains that the financial sector in the US needs to be strengthened, and that is what I think the government in the US is now going to. And as Treasury Secretary General Yellen also said that regulators had been working over the weekend to stabilize the Silicon Valley Bank, and that is what they want to do, stabilize those banks that are in the red and help them get back on their own 2 feet. But nevertheless, President Joe Biden did say that these banks knowingly took a risk, and when the risk did not pay off, investors lose their money. The president also said that is how capitalism works. So how much of a risk is the US financial system? In the coming days, we will only be knowing that as time comes by. But nevertheless, for the moment, there's a lot of negative sentiment, a lot of uncertainty as far as the US public is concerned, and indirectly in a lot of other public across the world as well. Let's hope the US comes to terms with this financial crisis as it did in 2008. But as Usman said, there were some flaws in that 2008 policy that I hope the US government is not going to follow in 2023. Our second segment, ladies and gentlemen, concerns the world responsibility towards illegal migration. We've seen so many examples of illegal migration in the last decades, in the last few years, but of recent there have been two such incidents. February 26th shipwreck near the southern region of Calabria, in which at least 79 people died. That included Pakistanis as well. And then recent, in which 30 people are missing, 17 rescued in the central Mediterranean on Sunday after the boat in which they were traveling from Libya capsized in bad weather. This was stated by the Italian Coast Guard. More in the following report.
The endless tragedies in Mediterranean Sea pose serious question upon global ethos as migrants continue to suffer unimaginable horrors during their journeys in search of better life. The European government's policy of treating migrant boats as a law enforcement issue rather than the humanitarian one may have fatally delayed help to the shipwrecked migrants. Human rights groups say many intercepted migrants end up in detention centers where they are tortured. Actions by several countries in Europe to criminalize, impede, or halt the work of humanitarian rescue vessels and search planes has worsened tragic fate of migrants. 30 people are missing and 17 were rescued in the central Mediterranean after the boat in which they were traveling from Libya capsized in bad weather. The tragedy comes just weeks after a February 26 shipwreck near the southern region of Calabria, in which at least 79 died. Alarm Phone, a charity that picks up calls from migrant vessels in distress, blamed Italy for not sending its Coast Guard despite being repeatedly alerted that the boat was in trouble. Rome's ability to rescue migrants at sea has come under scrutiny following last month's shipwreck against the backdrop of incumbent government which took office last October promising to curb the influx of migrants. In the absence of meaningful, safe and legal channels and the persistence of conflicts, rights violations, more innocent souls will be lost to the sea.
Now, to discuss that in detail, we've been joined by Ambassador Nasir Ali Khan in the studios. Ambassador Saab, thank you very much to have joined us. Ambassador Saab, tragedies such as these two that have happened in the last few weeks, the one on 26th of February and then this latest one, what are they all pointing towards? Is there any lacuna in the current systems as far as the illegal migration is concerned? Are there other issues that lead to more and more or increased migration to the US or Europe or other countries?
Oh, absolutely. You see, there are two areas where there's a lot of disgruntlement, a lot of frustration. Africa and South Asia. And basically the reasons are that there's slow economic development, there's a lack of security, and as far as Pakistan is concerned, these recurring natural disasters and political instability.
All right.
So this is causing tremendous frustration among the youth. And I read a recent survey which said that 67% of our youth want to leave the country and go away, which is a very sad situation. But on the other hand, countries like Somalia, Sudan, Cote d'Ivoire, all these are, huge areas where people are migrating to Europe from. And because North Africa, mainly areas of Libya, the situation being unstable, militias ruling, and to some extent Tunisia, these are the two areas very close to Italy from where people kind of hop across this bridge.
All right, but Ambassador sir, what I want to also understand is these tragedies that we have heard of that concern illegal migration, that are they also related directly or indirectly to the decision by the European governments to prioritize border control over sea rescue?
Not prioritize as such. There are, you see, here in this case, these two tragedies that have occurred in the past few weeks, it was mainly the Italian government that was involved. And since October, you've had a government there which is more or less a rightist government which came into power on an agenda of, controlling migration. So to some extent, they have sort of not been as enthusiastic in helping people who are desperate and trying to cross the Mediterranean over here. There are two areas in this case from Tunis to Sicily, and then from Benghazi, as in this recent case, to the south of Italy. They're very close. One area is like about 250, 260 kilometers. The other distance is about 500 kilometers. So these are areas which militias and human traffickers are controlling, and it's a very complicated thing. But your question about what is Europe really doing about it?
Because you
The
remember the decision that has recently been taken by the United Kingdom as far as illegal migration is concerned.
That's a separate, that is something which doesn't impact this incident that's taking place. This incident, by the way, this is a very, very active area for immigration, illegal immigration into Europe, and it is growing exponentially. For example, this last year, almost 20,000 people have crossed into Europe, whereas the year before that, it was like 6,000. So it's like 3 times as much. Now that is something that would be of concern to Europeans.
What is the obligation as far as these European countries are concerned, other countries also under the international human rights law, as far as the victims or those who participate in illegal migration is concerned? I'm talking of those who are there, not the all these companies that oversee these illegal migrations.
You mean the people?
Not the mafias, the people.
Oh, absolutely. It's a very sorry state of affairs. There are cases when 6-month-old babies are dying. The people, the human traffickers are absolutely callous because they are constantly deceiving the people that these are the brokers that get you across into Europe, and they promise one thing, they take the money, and at the end of the day, you end up being at the mercy of virtually the elements. For example, there'll be cases where they will take money from you, promise to take you in a fishing trawler, and when you get there and you're about to cross, you'll find you're in a small inflatable dinghy, and there is nobody to actually guide you across. There have been tons of cases where they've made one of the participants, one of the immigrants, as the captain of this little dinghy, given them a little compass and said, here, point you in that direction. So many cases where the dinghy has lost its inflation or simply capsized. So it's a very, very sorry situation.
The European immigration policy, do you feel that the countries need to revisit it?
Well, there are 2 factors here. Number one, in the long term, Europe is a relatively rich area, and yet it is a depleting and an aging population. So in the future, they definitely need immigrants from elsewhere who are going to take care of them. If you're a population, the majority of which in 20 years will be geriatrics, you need people to take care of you. Where will those people come from? They won't come from Western Europe. They won't come from Western Europe to help you, go to the bathroom or whatever. They will come from South Asia or Africa or wherever. So on the one hand, they are compelled to have immigration. But on the other hand, political narrative in Europe is becoming more and more right-wing. And people, when they are economically stressed, tend to look for scapegoats. And a very typical scapegoat is these illegal immigrants who come and take our jobs. In actual fact, these illegal immigrants are doing jobs that those Europeans would not be willing to do.
And refuse to do it because at the rates that these immigrants do the jobs, and so many,
Of course.
in different markets across Europe, across the United States, are jobs that nobody else wants to do. This said, do you feel that the EU has abdicated its responsibility as far as ensuring search and rescue operations in the Mediterranean is concerned?
No, there are certain countries like Germany that have a different outlook on this. Whereas those that are the most stressed, for in this case when you cross the Mediterranean, it's mainly Italy. If you go through Turkey and Bulgaria and all, it's mainly Hungary and countries like that. So there's a different policy that those people adopt. And as far as their governments are concerned, they have to pander or cater to the public opinion. Both now in Turkey, you have a very rightist, anti-immigrant government, and so do you in Italy. So, but the rest of it, for example, Germany has a different attitude.
All right.
Okay, so the rest of Holland, for instance, they have a slightly different attitude.
But if you generally speak of this illegal immigration and the effects on the migrants, on you talk about the stress on the economy of the governments, and that the people are looking for scapegoats, and that is why there are such stringent laws that are being put forward by certain countries in the West. Then how can one control this illegal migration, or should this illegal migration be legalized for some countries so that people who are under such stress can be boarded towards somewhere else instead of their boats capsizing and the authorities not being able to do something or to save their lives, at least, if nothing else?
Absolutely. In this particular case, where 30 people have died recently, and 2 weeks earlier about close to 80, 79 people died. There was a clear lack of capacity of the Libyans to actually handle these people. This tragedy occurred about 120 miles from Benghazi, northeast of Benghazi. But the Libyan government or the Libyan militia or the Libyan authorities said, we don't have the capacity, we don't have the vessels to actually go and rescue these people. So then the Italians finally were compelled to send some, and they also made an appeal to some of the merchant ships that were in the area. In fact, it was one of the merchant ships during transfer that the boat actually capsized. So answer to your question, what should they do to improve the situation, is to improve the capacity of these nations like Libya and Tunisia to be able to rescue, to be able to interdict, to be able to take care of these people so that these kind of tragedies and accidents don't occur. In Libya, there is a lot of lawlessness. There are militias that actually benefit from this kind of illegal immigration. But they don't have their act together. Many a times when these people go back, the militias take advantage of them. Also, the militias take a certain commission from the human traffickers. So the European governments need to strengthen the North African nations to be able to handle the problem at a very early stage.
I think that prevention and from people dying, at least rescuing them at the right time, and then of course you can look at modalities on how they can move forward, either remain in the country or be taken back, deported back to their country of origin. As far as the Libyan boat incident and Pakistan, some Pakistanis who died in it as well, the FIA Gujarat Circle has arrested the main accused who was involved in the Libyan boat incident. That was of course announced by the FIA spokesperson. This said, what in your point of view should be the contours of the framework that aims at preventing people from being the victims of these traffickers?
Are you asking me what our government ought to do?
What should be done globally, whether it be Pakistan, whether it be other countries? Because the immigrants not just come from Pakistan, they come from so many other countries as well.
The international community has to, the International Organization of Migration has to be strengthened. The international community needs to take this problem very, very seriously. They have to make a concerted effort in going after the human traffickers and creating a policy where they have, on the one hand, they know the need that exists in Europe for labor, and then they contact those countries where that labor is available, okay? And they have a proper system. For example, if I'm exporting labor to Europe, there should be a system in Pakistan where I have training for, at an international standard or level, so that when these laborers go there, they are equipped and they are truly needed and wanted and valued. You see? So this can be done. Unfortunately, the international community seems to have other priorities, and especially in Europe now with the Ukrainian crisis.
The priorities have completely changed.
The priorities are totally different. They're totally different.
But under this change of priorities, under this change of attitude towards illegal migration or accepting illegal migration or even rescuing them and taking care of them, do you foresee more tragedies?
Oh, absolutely. If things don't change, this will continue to happen. In the last year alone, I think 1,400 people have lost their lives, which is absolutely tragic, especially the young ones, especially the babies, the children. It's totally unacceptable. The international community needs to, take notice of it and actually get down to doing something about it.
When you talk of doing something about it, do you feel a socio-economic inclusion, good programming for the youth of any country, including that in Pakistan, local community-based development, are they good options so that people do not undergo this illegal migration?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll give you an example of the Philippines. The Philippines exports a lot of labor, especially to the Gulf countries. But their system is so well organized. They first look at the need that exists there, and then they train people on international standards. And it's not just the technical skills, they also give you the cultural skills. They tell you the history, they tell you the culture about the place where you're going to go to, so that you are aware of that, you're cognizant of that, and you can fit in better. So this is a very well organized system. And considering the population of the Philippines, the amount of money they repatriate is several times what we get in Pakistan. So this is totally possible. What the international community needs to do is figure out in which areas of the West, now whether it is Europe or it's North America, what are the skills, what are the laborers that are needed, and then there has to be a proper effort. For example, if I say that I can get nurses from Pakistan, the international community or the IOM needs to be involved in training nurses in Pakistan to
So
an
that the
international
demand is met with,
standard,
yes.
to an international standard. And that will not just include their skills, but they will also be trained to learn about the areas where they are going to go and live, so that they adjust culturally as well.
That is so true, Ambassador Saab. The fact remains that not only should the world, especially the countries in the West, be more cognizant of such tragedies and do the needful so that such tragedies do not happen more often in the future, but it is also the responsibilities of all the countries from where the illegal immigration happens to have A, stringent laws to arrest or stop these traffickers, and B, to help those people who are in need through different mechanisms, as you have just explained the mechanism in the Philippines. We need to create that demand through proper training so that whenever the demand comes from the UAE, Saudi Arabia or other countries, we have the necessary knowledge, skill in the people so that they can go and then work and then bring back the remittances to Pakistan as well. Thank you so very much, Ambassador Nasir Ali Khan Saab, to have joined us, to have talked to us about this very crucial issue that is plaguing the world, and that is illegal migration. Let's come to our last two stories. The first concerns, ladies and gentlemen, the Punjab Culture Day that is going to be celebrated being celebrated today under the auspices of the Department of Information and Culture. Many different activities have been held all across the Punjab province. It's a wonderful, colorful province with such a rich tradition and culture, and that is being highlighted today. And I hope you have visited some of the areas where all these cultural festivities were happening, including Azhar-e Flohar, Fazal Jat, Sain Zahur, and so many others. And finally, ladies and gentlemen, the Senate is also about to celebrate its 50th anniversary with 3-day events starting from tomorrow. This event will include various activities, ceremonies, tree plantation, commemorative stamp, coin issuance, and unveiling of the Senate anthem as well. 50 years since our Senate came into existence. We wish them all the very best, and I hope you will be attending some of these events and witnessing through our shows as well while we show you the different clips of what has been happening across Pakistan. With that, we come to an end of today's newsroom. We'll see you inshallah tomorrow with news stories and segments that pertain to us, you in Pakistan. Stay safe. Allah Hafiz.